I took the job because no one else wanted it and because I needed somewhere quiet to disappear for a while. The farm sat beyond a rural village most people only pass through, a patchwork of wheat fields, rotting fences, and a farmhouse that leaned like it was tired of standing. On my first morning, the owner didn't ask for references or experience. He handed me a folded paper, looked me in the eye, and said if I followed the rules exactly, I would be paid well and left alone. I laughed then, which I regret now every single day. The paper listed 5 rules, written in careful block letters, like a warning meant to survive rain, wind, and time. Rule 1 said never enter the lower fields after sunset, no matter what I heard or who called my name. Rule 2 said to count the animals every morning, and if the number was wrong, I was to lock myself in the tool shed until noon. Rule 3 said never accept food offered by anyone already standing inside the fields. Rule 4 said to burn any tool that came back warm. Rule 5 simply said if I broke a rule, I was not to run. I assumed it was a joke. Some rural hazing meant to scare off outsiders like me. The owner didn't smile when I said that. He just nodded toward the fields and told me the village used to be larger and the farm used to be smaller, and that there was a reason those things had changed. My first week passed quietly. I fed animals, repaired fences, and learned the land's moods. The village kept its distance. People watched from windows but never waved. At night, the fields whispered like breathing. The first time I heard my name called after sunset, I was already inside the farmhouse, washing dirt from my hands. The voice sounded like my mother, gentle and worried, asking why I was ignoring her. I froze, soap dripping onto the floor, heart hammering as Rule 1 echoed in my head. I didn't answer. The voice grew closer, angrier, then confused, until it faded into the wheat. I didn't sleep that night, and in the morning, the owner told me I'd done well. Counting the animals became my obsession. Cows, goats, chickens, always the same numbers, always checked twice. One morning, the count was wrong by 1. A goat was missing. I felt sick, locked myself in the shed, and waited. From inside, I heard hooves circling, scraping against the walls, and something breathing far too slowly to be alive. At noon, silence returned. When I came out, the goat was back, staring at me like it remembered something I didn't want to know. The village finally spoke to me after that. An old woman left bread on the fence, and told me never to eat anything grown in the fields. She said the land learned faces, learned voices, and practiced them when it thought no one was listening. She warned me about Rule 3 with shaking hands, saying hunger made people stupid, and the fields counted on that. When I asked why the farm still operated, she said someone had to keep it contained, and that someone was always temporary. Rule 4 scared me the most. Tools don't come back warm from honest work. The first time it happened, the shovel handle was hot, almost pulsing, like it had been held by something alive. I didn't question it. I burned it behind the shed, watching the smoke twist into shapes that looked almost human before dissolving. That night, I dreamed of hands reaching up through soil, learning the shape of fingers by copying mine, patiently, lovingly. I broke a rule on a night thick with fog. I was tired, careless, and hungry. And when a man stood in the field offering me food, I didn't think about how his boots didn't sink into the dirt. I took the bread. It tasted like ash and blood. The fog moved wrong after that, flowing toward me instead of away. I remembered Rule 5 too late. I didn't run. I stood there shaking as the fields leaned closer to see what I'd learned. Something peeled itself out of the wheat, wearing the man's face badly, stretching skin over a shape that didn't fit. It thanked me for staying still. It said running made the game boring. I don't remember how long I stood there, but I remember the owner pulling me back, burning something behind my eyes with a flare, screaming that I was lucky. The village lights came on that night, all at once, like a signal flare. I still work here. The rules haven't changed, but I have. The fields whisper less to me now, like they're waiting. Sometimes, when I count the animals, I realize I'm also counting people, including myself. The paper with the rules is older, more worn, like it's been passed down many times. I've started writing a sixth rule in the margins, just in case. If someone new arrives, I'll hand it to them and hope they laugh. After that night, the farm stopped pretending I was a stranger. The air felt heavier when I woke, like the land was holding its breath, listening for my first step. I followed the rules harder than ever, repeating them under my breath as I worked, turning them into a rhythm that matched my movements. The owner watched me more closely, his eyes tired but sharper, like he was measuring how much of me was still mine. He didn't ask what I saw in the fog. He never asks questions that might have answers he can't fix. The village began leaving offerings along the fence line again. Salt in small jars, knotted twine, scraps of paper with names crossed out. No one explained them, but I understood they were reminders, not gifts. At night, I heard footsteps along the dirt road, stopping just short of the property, as if the people were counting how many steps it took to reach safety. Sometimes I heard children laughing from the lower fields, even though no children lived here anymore. Rule 1 kept me inside, lights off, breathing slow. I learned that the rules weren't just protection. They were boundaries that taught the land what it was allowed to try. When I followed them perfectly, the farm stayed quiet, restless but contained. When I slipped, even slightly, things got curious. One afternoon, I noticed the scarecrows had shifted, their heads tilted toward the house, arms raised not like warnings, but like invitations. I burned them all, even though no rule said to. The smoke screamed when the wind caught it. Counting the animals became harder. They began standing closer together, bodies pressed tight, eyes fixed on me as if daring me to miscount. I started marking tallies in the dirt, whispering numbers so I wouldn't forget myself. Once, a cow blinked and its eyes were wrong. Too many reflections swimming inside them. I closed my eyes and finished the count by sound alone, trusting hooves and breath over sight. The number was right. The cow turned away, disappointed. The owner finally told me why Rule 5 existed. He said running told the fields you were prey, and prey didn't get to keep their shape. Standing still confused them. It forced them to decide what you were before they touched you. He said that hesitation saved lives, or at least delayed endings. He showed me scars along his back, lines like fingerprints burned into his skin. He said they came from a time when he ran. A long time ago. One evening, I found a tool already waiting for me by the shed. Still warm, still wet. It was a hammer I hadn't used. Its handle darkened like it had been soaked in blood. I didn't touch it with my hands. I hooked it with wire and dragged it to the burn pit, heart racing as the ground vibrated beneath my feet. As it burned, I heard my own voice begging me to stop, promising it would behave if I just listened. I kept the fire going until there was nothing left but ash. The land started testing smaller rules that didn't exist yet. Paths shifted overnight. Gates opened when I locked them. Once, I found footprints leading from the lower fields to my bedroom door, stopping inches from the threshold. I scrubbed them away before dawn, but the dirt kept smearing into shapes that looked like toes learning how to bend. I didn't sleep after that, Sleep felt like another rule waiting to be broken. The old woman from the village returned, this time stepping just inside the fence. She told me the farm used to belong to the fields, not the other way around, and that working it was a form of negotiation. Every rule was a sentence in a language older than words. Break enough of them, and the land stopped listening. She looked at me sadly and said the farm had started practicing my face. I asked what that meant. She didn't answer. That night, I heard myself calling from the wheat. Not my mother's voice, not a stranger's, but mine exactly, down to the way I hesitated before certain words. It told me I was tired, that it could finish my work for me. It said it knew all 5 rules now. I locked myself in the shed before sunset and stayed there until my legs went numb. Outside, something paced, counting along with me, getting better each time. I realized then that the rules weren't meant to keep me alive forever. They were meant to slow the learning process, to buy time. Someone always leaves, eventually. Someone always gets replaced. I started writing everything down. At night, every sound, every mistake, every near miss, hoping knowledge could be heavier than hunger. The paper grew thick, heavy in my hands, like it wanted to stay. By morning, the farm was quiet again, but it felt like the calm after a decision. The owner avoided my eyes. The village lights stayed off. When I counted the animals, I realized one of them was watching me the way I watched the fields, carefully, patiently. I wrote a new line in the margin of the rules page, even though my hands were shaking. I didn't know yet if it would help, but I knew the land was reading along with me. The 6th rule started as a joke to keep myself sane, but the more I wrote, the more it felt like the farm was leaning over my shoulder, reading every word. I wrote that if the fields ever spoke in my voice without asking first, I was to cover my ears and think of nothing at all. Silence, the old woman once told me, was the only thing the land couldn't imitate perfectly. I didn't know if that was true, but believing it made the nights easier to endure. The owner finally admitted he was leaving. He said his time was overdue, and that staying too long made the fields bold. He packed quietly, moving through the house like a ghost already half claimed. Before dawn, he handed me the keys and the rules paper, thicker now with my notes and margins. He told me I'd done well, better than most, and that the village would help when they could. When I asked where he would go, he smiled sadly and said nowhere the land could follow. Running the farm alone changed everything. The fields grew closer, the village farther away. The animals started responding to gestures I didn't remember teaching them. lining up without fences, stopping when I raised my hand. It felt like power until I realized the land was the one teaching, using me as a demonstration. One morning, I miscounted on purpose, just to see what would happen. The shed door rattled before I even reached it. Eager, excited, I didn't try again. The voices became more confident. They stopped calling me at night and started talking during the day, blending with the wind, slipping between my thoughts. They reminded me of things I'd forgotten, small details from my childhood, secrets I'd never told anyone. Each correct memory made them stronger, clearer, more real. I learned to respond with nonsense, with half-remembered songs, anything to muddy the water. Confusion slowed them down, the same way hesitation had once slowed me. The village held a meeting without inviting me. I watched the lights from the farmhouse, counting windows as they flickered on and off, knowing they were deciding how long they could keep pretending I was still human. The old woman came alone the next day. She told me the farm was changing owners again, whether I agreed or not. She said replacement didn't always mean death. Sometimes it meant assimilation. Sometimes it meant becoming a rule yourself. I started finding copies of me doing my work just out of sight. A shadow moving wrong. A reflection lingering too long in the barn window. Once, I heard footsteps matching mine exactly, stopping when I stopped. I burned every mirror I could find, even though no rule demanded it. The smoke tasted like copper and rain. That night, the fields were quiet, offended, like a child denied a toy. The sixth rule grew longer. I wrote that names mattered, that if the land ever spoke my name without emotion, I was to change it. I practiced answering to nothing, to silence, until my own voice felt foreign in my mouth. The animals watched, unblinking. The lower fields rippled, learning patience. I understood then that survival wasn't about escape. It was about becoming too complicated to copy cleanly. The first winter alone was brutal. Snow hid the boundaries, erased paths, made everything look the same. I tied ropes between buildings so I wouldn't wander where I shouldn't. Under the snow, something moved, mapping me, memorizing the way. I leaned into the wind. When spring came, the wheat grew thicker than ever. Tall enough to hide mistakes, I burned a wide ring around the farmhouse and dared the fields to cross it. They didn't, but they remembered. One evening, exhausted, I sat on the porch and spoke to the land like it was a person. I told it I would stay as long as it needed me, but I wouldn't belong to it. I didn't know if it understood, but the wind softened, almost curious. The voices quieted. For the first time, I felt like I'd negotiated something real, something fragile. I added one final line to the rules paper. I wrote that if someone new ever arrived, and the farm felt too eager to meet them, I was to leave immediately. No explanations, no goodbyes. The paper felt warm when I finished, but it didn't burn. I took that as a sign, though I didn't know of what. Tonight, I'm counting again. Animals and breaths and heartbeats, listening to the fields whisper my name less often, less clearly. I don't know how long this balance will hold. I only know that the farm is still contained, and so am I, for now. If you ever find this place and someone hands you a list of rules, read them carefully. And if there's a sixth one written in a shaky hand, trust it. I keep the keys by the door now. Not because I plan to leave, but because knowing I can makes the nights quieter. The farm understands preparation. It respects readiness. When the wind shifts, I feel it test the edges of my thoughts, searching for gaps where fear might still live. I give it chores instead. I mend fences that don't need mending. I count animals that haven't moved. I stay busy enough that it forgets to ask questions. The village has begun to change again. New families arrive, unaware of what the soil remembers. I see children running near the road and feel the fields lean, interested, hopeful. I ring the bell the old owner left behind, a dull iron sound meant to warn without explaining. People pause, frown, and pull their children closer. That's enough. Education here happens without words. Some nights, I think about leaving, about testing the last rule I wrote for myself. I imagine walking past the burned ring, past the lower fields, past the place where the wheat first learned my name. The idea feels heavy, like gravity increasing with every step imagined. I suspect the land would let me go. It already has something better. My habits, my routines, my careful balance. Letting me leave would prove it learned restraint. I've noticed the copies don't appear as often. When they do, they're sloppy, missing details, forgetting scars, blinking too slowly. That tells me I'm still ahead. Complexity wins. Change wins. I hum new songs, change my handwriting, rearrange rooms. The farm hates unpredictability. It prefers clean patterns, simple replacements. I refuse to give it those. If this is the end of my story, it isn't a bad one. I kept something contained. I made myself difficult. I turned rules into a conversation instead of a sentence. That has to count for something. The fields whisper sometimes, but now they sound unsure, like a student double checking answers. I let them. Learning takes time, and time is the only thing I've ever really controlled here. If you're listening to this because you're considering the job, or because someone you trust handed you a piece of paper and a set of keys, know this: the rules are real, but they aren't complete. Pay attention to what the land wants, then deny it, gently, patiently, every day. And if you hear your own voice calling from the fields, don't answer. Write another rule. Make it true. I will stay alert, adaptable, unfinished. Because the moment I become predictable, the farm will finish the sentence for me. And I refuse to let the land decide when my story ends. Until then, I count, listen, change, and keep writing rules the fields cannot steal from me now. The sun had barely risen when I forced myself out of the creaking cot in the barn. My body ached in ways I hadn't known were possible. Muscles stiff, back protesting, skin still sticky from sweat and soil. But there was no time to rest. The rules weren't just words on paper. They were survival itself. I stepped carefully through the scattered straw, my eyes flicking toward the farmhouse in the distance. It looked calm, innocent, but I knew better. Beneath its quiet facade, something waited, something patient. I had broken the first rule yesterday. I hadn't hesitated when it appeared, hadn't let my instinct warn me, and yet I had survived. Barely. But surviving once didn't mean surviving again. Each rule was a layer, a shield against the unseen, and any breach could mean the end. I clenched my fists, forcing my mind into focus. My grandfather's words echoed, deep and deliberate. 5 rules. Follow them and you live. Break one and you join the field. I'd laughed at that once, not out loud, but in my mind. The exaggeration of an old man protecting his legacy. Now I understood. The field didn't forgive. The field didn't negotiate. It didn't care who you were, what you had done, or how brave you thought you were. It simply took, and it was hungry. I left the barn and moved toward the edge of the wheat. The first rays of sun casting the stalks in gold, but also in shadow. Shadows that moved when the wind wasn't blowing. Shadows that lingered too long at the corner of my vision. I counted my steps carefully, keeping to the path I had memorized. Every crack in the soil, every root, every dip in the ground logged in my memory. Rule 1. Never wander alone. I could feel the consequences of breaking that rule, not just in whispers and shapes, but in the weight pressing at my chest, the sensation of being observed, measured, assessed. I wasn't alone. Not really. I could feel it coiling, stretching, rooting into the soil, watching me navigate the field as though I were a puzzle it needed solved. Rule 2. Never respond to voices. The voice had been my grandmother's yesterday. Sweet, comforting, impossible. Today, there were dozens. Fragments of speech carried on the breeze. My mother's laugh, my childhood friend calling my name, the laughter of strangers I had seen in town but never spoken to. I ignored them, focusing on the worn leather of the toolbox in my hands, the flare gun and hatchet within reach. Each step was an act of defiance. Rule 3. Never look behind you. I refused to glance at the farmhouse, at the barn, at the trembling wheat that seemed to sway in anticipation of something unspeakable. The silence of obeying that rule was deafening. Yet it offered clarity, a fragile shield of sanity. I could almost believe I was alone. Almost. Rule 4. Respect the soil. The earth itself was alive, or perhaps something older than life. But there was power in it and in respecting it. My boots sank slightly with each step, and I imagined the roots underfoot, vast and tangled, stretching like veins into the dark heart of the field. Not to be careless, not to stumble, not to provoke. Every movement mattered. Rule 5. Complete the task. Whatever it was, whatever drew you here, you had to finish it, or it would come for you again. And next time, it would not let you leave. I reached the north edge of the field, where the oak tree's massive shadow pooled in the early light. The journal had said its heart could be wounded, its roots set ablaze. But approaching it, I could feel the pulse in the ground, the slow, heavy rhythm of something vast and aware. The stalks around me trembled as though the tree itself exhaled, testing my resolve. Shapes began to form, figures of those I loved and lost, all calling to me, begging, pleading. I gritted my teeth, tightened my grip on the flare gun, and advanced. The air grew thick, almost tangible, like moving through water. Each step a battle. I fired the first flare into the roots, a hiss of burning that mingled with the smell of earth and smoke. The wheat lashed at me, spectral hands, yet I pushed forward. One by one, the mimics' faces twisted, cracked, revealing the hollow core beneath. They shrieked, not in sound, but in psychic pressure, pressing against my mind, dredging up guilt, fear, shame. I kept moving, repeating a single mantra. a lifeline. Not real, not real, not real. Step after step, strike after strike, flame after flame, until at last the oak groaned, split, and collapsed. The field stilled, the whispering ended. Silence, not the tense, deceptive quiet that had haunted me, but true silence. For the first time in days, I could breathe. Sweat ran down my face, dirt and ash mixed with tears I didn't realize I'd held back. I fell to my knees, gasping, my hands shaking, and then, from the distance, I heard the sound of life, the soft crow of a rooster from the village, the faint rustle of the farmhouse door, the reassuring clink of the milk bucket from the morning milking. I had survived. I had broken the cycle. I had learned the rules, obeyed them, and survived. The field was empty, but I knew better than to believe it would stay that way forever. The soil remembered, and the roots would regrow, waiting for the next trespasser. But for now, I could leave, slowly, carefully. I retraced my steps back through the wheat, marking each crack, each root, each detail to carry with me forever. Rule 1 through 5 engraved in my mind. Never alone, never respond, never look back. Respect the soil. Complete the task. I glanced once at the remains of the oak tree, blackened and smoking. A promise, not of finality, but of survival. And as I stepped onto the familiar dirt path toward the village, I knew I was no longer the same. The farm had taken something from me, but it had also given me something no one else could understand. Knowledge, respect, and the fragility of life in places where rules are not suggestions, but lifelines. The village ahead beckoned with normalcy, but I didn't dare look back. I kept walking. I survived, and I would remember.